Hi, welcome. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight. We are just moments away from the end of the last debate. We had two presidential debates for the 2020 presidential election. Before we vote, this was the chance to really look at the candidates. You know, if you had been here before, that we talked already about the first debate as well as about the vice presidential debate. And now we have a great panel to talk about the third debate. We're very excited about this. A lot of this is tied to the fact that we at the Museum of Broadcast Communication, and by the way, my name is Susy Schultz. I'm the executive director of the Museum of Broadcast Communication, that we are looking at this year really the effect of the broadcast industry on the presidential process. So what has happened? What does the broadcast industry do to either detract, promote, elevate, or de-escalate the whole process of the presidential election? And if you are a teacher, if you are a lifelong learner, if you are an educator, a parent, then we're so glad that you're here tonight, because we are going to talk about how we discuss this with students. And we want you to know that we're backing you up with resources at greatdebates.org, which is updated in real time. It has not only a timeline, but it also has different articles about different pivotal debates. And it also has a curriculum supporting this with 8 key moments, with 8 key modules that overlay on top of the core curriculum. And tonight we're going to open this up because it is, again, all about what did we think and how do we teach this? How do we move forward with this? And it's not just teachers in the classroom, it's teachers who are at home as well. We're respectful of the parents' role of being a great teacher as well. So we hope to step away from rancor and partisanship in this discussion tonight. And with us tonight to help us do that are 3 phenomenal panelists. I'm going to start up at the top with Dr. Dennis Cremin, who is the professor of history at Lewis University, where he also directs the History Center, and he's author of numerous scholarly articles and encyclopedic entries. And he is also the guru and the man who introduced me to Gretchen Patrick, who, along with me and my colleague Carol Summerfield, did a marvelous job on co-authoring the 8 curriculum modules on greatdebates.org. Thank you so much, Dennis, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Susy. I'm so glad to be here.
And then next we have Deborah Douglas. Deborah, Ms. Didi, is a distinguished visiting professor of journalism at DePauw University. She's also the managing editor of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism Project. She's a senior leader with the Op-Ed Project and formerly an adjunct lecturer at the Medill School of Journalism. I could go on. And she was also a member of the Chicago Chicago Sun-Times editorial board. And Didi's work has appeared in just a huge amount of great journalistic outlets. And Deborah, we are so glad that you're joining us here tonight. Thank you. And Toinette, Dr. Toinette Gunn, thank you so much for being here tonight. She is the executive director of Chicago Debates, a position she's held since August of 2018. Prior to that, she was vice president of programs for Chicago Scholars. And prior to both of those, she is someone who has held distinguished leadership positions in the human services and nonprofit world. And you are a much degreed woman. We are so grateful to have you here tonight to talk about students and debate and scholarship. So I'm going to open it up with a real softball here, my friends and my colleagues. How do you think that one went? So I'm not able to hear. Thanks as well to Fritz Goldman, who's our engineer tonight. And I am not able to hear my colleagues. Is that, do you think that everybody else is able to hear them? Can you hear one another?
Susy, Can you hear me? Susy, can you hear me?
I can hear Dennis. So, Fritz, could you possibly work on how we could hear Deborah and Toinette? That would be wonderful. And Dennis, maybe you could answer that question. How do you think things went tonight?
Sure. I think the contrast couldn't be greater between their first debate and this debate. This fell in line with kind of the historical debates as they've existed in the past. I was really struck by the ability of Joe Biden and President Trump to touch on a number of issues, especially the COVID 19, the national economy, national health care, and not touching them all, but also on climate change. And so, in many ways, we still have somebody who, in President Trump, who's very good at thinking on his feet and coming up with the key pithy phrases that we've come to expect from him. And I look forward to hearing Deborah and Toinette on those issues.
Yeah, and let's see, can we hear Deborah and Toinette? Deborah. No, I cannot. Toinette, can I hear you? So this will be this one-on-one discussion with you and me. Is it Fritz, do you have any guidance? Is there anything else that we should be doing right now? Okay, I'm going to move ahead. So I really think, let's do a little thumbs up and thumbs down vote. So how do you think that Biden did on discussing COVID? Let me look at my colleagues. Let's look at our colleagues right now. Let's go back to the 3 people on the screen. We go to that. Okay, so thumbs. Okay, all right. So we got a thumbs up from Deborah. We got a thumbs up from Dennis, and we got an A from Toinette. How do we think that President Trump did on discussing COVID-19 and the response?
Yeah,
we got thumbs down all the way around. Okay. Because I don't think there was a lot of facts involved with it. I think there was a lot of rhetoric that really came about and that we've heard over and over. Is that accurate? Is that accurate? Can I do sign language with each of you? And what do we think about our moderator, Kristen Welker from NBC News? How do you think she did? First, we'll go to how do you think she handled the president? Did she do a good job of focusing him? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. Thumbs up. Okay. So we're halfway there, but we've got 2 who are up and whatever. And how do you think she did in moderating Vice President Biden? Thumbs up. Good. It was, Dennis, I think you're very right that it was much calmer and it was much nicer. It felt much more civil. So let's talk about the thumb votes that we took. Okay. Let's talk about how well we thought Kristen did.
I think she did well.
Go ahead, Toinette.
Yeah, I think she did well. If she was one of our judges at a tournament, I think certainly they don't have to offer as much guidance to students. They kind of know what to do and how to do it. But I think she did really well in getting them back on topic and interrupting when she needed to interrupt to say, okay, let's move on. Or maybe I got the sense in some cases she was saying like, that isn't on topic or that is a low blow. Let's move on to the next thing. And so I think she did well.
Yeah. And Deborah, how do you think? What do you think? Was she pretty good?
Yeah, in all of the debates, they've been the candidates have been given a lot of forbearance. And so she did a great job compared to the other moderators. But I think that maybe she could have gotten tougher sooner because everybody else on the other end, they're just waiting. They just really want to hear and they want to know the process works. And instead of just giving so much rope, letting it build up until she actually puts her foot down, it would have been great if she could have been tougher sooner.
So let me ask you, at this point in the whole election cycle, does this debate mean anything? We've already had tens of millions of people who voted across the country. Or do we think that we have people who are undecided? I mean, we basically had a little snare drum from all of the people hyping this, saying, hey, this is your last chance to check this out. But do we think that it matters? Do we think that this debate matters?
No. People have already made up their minds. There's no such thing as an undecided voter. And we are performing normalcy, and there's nothing normal about 2020.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point. It's the way we would do stuff, right? We got to do the debates. We scheduled the debates, and so we have to do this. Anybody else? Anybody else think that it
So,
matters? Doesn't matter?
yeah,
We have no
I
problem with
think it
disagreeing.
should matter. I think it should matter. And I looked at it today, of course, as the executive director of Chicago Debates, but also as a parent of a sixth grader and a son who's in college, to say, how can I have a conversation with them about what we saw tonight, and immediately for me, I found myself troubled with what are the facts, where's the evidence, what's actual. And unfortunately, in a situation like this, and even in a debate round within our program, the judge or the moderator doesn't have the ability to go and then research for themselves in the moment.
Right.
And so you have to kind of trust that what is being said and what is being cited is credible and valid. And I think I have had trouble with that in listening to the two candidates going back and forth. And so as I think about what we would say to debaters, what we would say, to our children, is we got to go do some homework, right? Like, we heard all of these questions, we heard all of these things kind of, stated here or there and rebutted here or there, but what's really true? And that's what I would be looking to do, is take away, to say, let's go and do some fact checking or researching to figure out what's the real evidence here, to know whether the candidates were speaking truthfully or not.
I think that's a great point. I know there were a number of places, including the New York Times, who were fact checking in real time. So you could scroll through and they would give you false, they would give you whatever. But I also noticed, because as I was watching it, that it wasn't as fast as I would have liked. It wasn't, which, we wanted all, right?
Yes.
What about you? Did you think that this was what was your big questions and your takeaways from this?
I think I again think it was important. I think it was far more important for President Trump, um, and he will probably have won the battle of the phrases. Um, the ones that I wrote down. I ran because of you, he said at one point. You have done nothing. He hammered that point down. All talk, no action. The hitting on the um, that last point, he'll destroy the oil industry. Um, on the flip side, I think uh, Vice President Biden did a really good job with national health care and COVID-19. We expected him to do well there. And I think many people would have gotten to the last statement that he made with that hypothetical of what he would say at his inaugural. And he really talked about character, decency, and being the president of all Americans. I think he made a nice closing argument.
Yeah, I think that was great. We have a question from Facebook. Will the first, and Deborah, I'm going to throw this one to you first. Will the first 2020 presidential debate be forgotten as an anomaly, or will it continue to be held as the standard or example of a really bad debate?
I can't imagine that we would ever forget that. And I any of the planning going forward has to calibrate with something going terribly wrong. And now we know what terribly wrong looks like. I wouldn't put it past someone who is not as much of a character as President Trump, pulling some of these tricks, out of their sleeve if they felt like they needed to get an advantage. Because the process shows that you can get away with a lot if you just try. It's just like make the mistake and apologize later. That kind of ethos.
And so, do you think that that by comparison to that really bad debate, Deborah, do you think that this debate made each of the candidates, especially President Trump, look more presidential?
Again, it's a case where this is not based on any data. This is just a gut belief that is being expressed by a lot of people, and it's that most people have their minds made up already. So for people who look at President Trump and and they see a reflection of a type of leadership that they want. And it's an unconventional kind of leadership than we're accustomed to, but that's what a leader looks like to them. So he looks like that to them. And for people who are rooting for Joe Biden, well, he has been doing this for 47 years, and he does know. He is deeply grounded in the issues, and he knows his way around, policy very well, as shown tonight and in other situations. And so for people for whom the traditional sort of respectable way of comporting yourself as a leader at that level, then he comes off as presidential.
And Toinette, so when you, I'm not sure how you explained that first one to so many of your colleagues or so many of the students who are part of Chicago debates, but does that go by the wayside, and does the president then become more of a standard bearer in this one, or where do you see the two of them balancing out?
Yeah, I'm not sure, what students might think around, whether the president looked more presidential now or not. I think they would say that it was certainly more structured than it was the first time around. And so you were able to answers that were coming through. But I still think our students would look at this and have a number of critiques around the format in which they debate and how they debate in comparison to what we saw tonight. There was still a lot of not really answering some of the questions, directing and going to some other statement that they want to get out there. And that you're just going to lose points for things like that in policy debate. And so students would definitely be very critical of that, to say, well, he didn't answer the question, or I kept looking for, like, what are the plans? And so I heard several things from Biden around plans and actual steps or things that he would do, but less of that from our president, to say the specific question was about a plan. Did he offer a plan? And that is all that a debate is about, is you're offering a plan to solve. They call it solvency, to solve the problem at hand. And I didn't necessarily see that from the president. And I know our students would be critical of that.
I want you to go back into that just a little bit, which is what you are teaching, of course, is a debate, is how to debate. And these debates, while they have that title, aren't really full debates, right? So what would a real debate, according to Chicago debates, and what you teach your students, look like? I think that's a great way to ask students in a juxtaposition. What did this look like tonight? What should it have looked like?
Yeah, one of the things I would point out most importantly about policy debate is the amount of time that students are required to listen. And it's listening for understanding, which in itself just puts you in a better position to be able to understand what is being said, so that you know how to respond. And I think at the foundation of what students are doing, they're doing more listening than they are talking. Even though at our high school level, they're spending 90 minutes in a debate round, but three times more listening in that round than talking. And so I think that's a really powerful, skill that students are cultivating through debate. And it's something that lends to then empathy. It lends to being respectful. And those are skills, life skills, that we all need, right? When we're talking about the last debate and what we saw, it certainly there wasn't much listening.
And I'm just going to harp a little bit on what you do, because I think it's so important. Because students who actually come to debate and debate competitions have to come armed with both sides, because they do not know which side they're going to be arguing, correct?
So they do know that they're going to argue both the affirmative and the negative. They don't know, in going into a round, which side they're getting until they're getting into that round. So they are prepared. And that is one of the beauties of debate, and being able to help students to not only listen and listen for understanding, but also then to prepare yourself to be able to rebut that argument, but also to sit on the other side of that at some point throughout the day, that you're going to have to argue the opposite side. So it really does give them this skill of being able to look at things, from different perspectives, but being able to respect other perspectives, being able to, we talk about civil discourse, and I may not agree with you, but I can be respectful. We can have a tough conversation, and debate really does push students to learn how to do that, even though we may not agree. And at the end of it, we still may not agree. But I have walked away to respect your opinion. I've walked away to see your side of it. And that makes me a stronger person overall, to be able to have a skill in that way where I can see every part of it, but also I still, find value or stand where I stand with the argument. But maybe I changed my mind based on what you've shared from your perspective. But they do that, and it's a critical skill that they learn how to see all angles.
So that's a great point. Miss Deborah, when you're teaching this, if you're teaching your students, your journalism students, how to cover this, crucial, of course, is what are the facts going on here? How do you teach them how to navigate something in real time like this and then move on to, oh, I'm going to write something about it right away?
Yeah, I try to arm them. They actually do have an assignment to write about this. And I tried to point them to a fact checking site. I harp a lot on using primary sources above secondary sources. And that means that, a New York Times can be a secondary source, but I would rather push them to go to a more official source or the original source. And so, we've gone over tools like PolitiFact and talked about the people behind that who generate those responses very often in real time. You know, Mostly academics, people deeply grounded in the topics that are being excavated.
Do
And
you
I
recommend PolitiFacts to your students to use?
think
Do you recommend PolitiFacts to your students to use?
I absolutely do, yes. Because I work with a lot of academics for a lot of different projects, and I've actually worked specifically with academics who answer the questions for PolitiFact. So I know I can trust the fact that they're deeply grounded, they have deeply grounded expertise in the topics that are being excavated. And there are other resources that you can check also, but I just challenge them to not lean into their assumptions about things, or sometimes there can be a lack of response or a lack of outrage about something, like the whole comment about catch and release that is currently not being addressed at all by the commentators post debate I'm seeing on social media. And there was no follow up to a lot of the dehumanizing language that was used tonight. And so that can kind of create a sense of normalcy around the use of that kind of language and that kind of rhetoric. So I just always invite them to just challenge their own assumptions about what is normal and what is not.
One of the great points you made on the first debate, Deborah, was how the question was framed when they started talking about race, and Chris Wallace actually said to President Trump when he was addressing him, and you can either address this question or not address this question, which and you pointed out very wisely was just almost racist in its whole construction. You, as the president, don't even have to talk about race. Did you feel that did you see or hear examples of that beyond catch and release, where you felt that the questions were not poised to really elicit answers?
Well, it did happen again tonight. And my mother made this point on Facebook that a question came up and the answer had to do with Black people in incarceration. Again, as if that's the only issue that affects Black people. It's almost like saying that the only immigrants are Latinos, and the only issues that Latinos care about is immigration. And
Right.
and all of these groups are just so much more. They have full lives in that. We're not a single story. Like Chimamanda Adichie says, there's a danger of a single story. We get reduced down to these single stories. My mom's like, I don't know anybody in prison. What are you talking about? Why is this question, this answer coming when we're talking about race? So yeah, it happens all the time. And if we're not attuned to it, then it will keep happening.
Yeah, and we conflate race with crime. We conflate immigration with a race. We are and I think it's really wonderful to be able to point out to students where's the disconnect there. So I'm going to move on to you, Dennis, and ask you in terms of history, the moments that we saw here right now. What are the things that you could see leading students to reflect back on this moment that happened then? What is there correspondences that you see?
It was interesting thinking about the rich materials that we have on greatdebates.org, and I really appreciate Deborah's and Toinette's perspectives, because I think for students to be civically engaged and sharpening their critical thinking skills, they need to look to the past occasionally to see what models are there. The one that I looked at earlier today from the debates, which has a number of video clips, was looking at Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Reagan with his Hollywood background, and Carter with his very analytical style. I think students should look back at that, because this couldn't be more different in terms of content, because I think both Reagan and Carter actually were able to put forth positions in a way that our current situation doesn't allow, or at least is reduced to sound bites. And just one last thing, I think thinking about the media, and this is something that the Museum of Broadcast Communication does really well on this website. And if you haven't checked it out, it's fantastic to go into. The timelines are up to date, and especially these video debates will ground you in the historical context, so that you can think about the media and the role that it plays in shaping these debates as well. And Deborah, you're touching on that point so well.
Thank you. One more point that Biden mentioned that climate change was an existential threat. And that is just factually not true. It's not an existential threat. It's a threat right now. It's here. It's not just out. And if you live in certain communities that are in the grip of environmental racism, then you're feeling the effects of climate change more acutely than other people.
It is so important to look through different lenses to actually find the stories, and that to me is really important, especially when we're teaching students about not only empathy but also perspective. If you When I worked at the Chicago Foundation for Women, we often looked at the budget when it came out, the federal budget, the state budget, and the local budget, and we looked through it through the lens of how does it affect women and girls. And so our reporting and our stories on that was very different, very different than the mainstream press. When you look, how do people of color, how does the LGBTQ community, how do women and girls look at this? When you take that lens, and I think that's a really great exercise with students to say, when you're looking at an issue from this perspective, what are you seeing? Versus this generic type of I've got to get this on the air very quick type of issue. Very often those are relegated to analytical stories, when indeed they're actually probably some of the more important stories that should be done quickly. So we're only here for half an hour, so we're almost up with our time. But I wanted you all to bring in anything else, any of the different curriculums that you use, what you use at Chicago debates. What again, because remember, we're talking to teachers and we're talking to parents, and we are talking to lifelong learners. They're along for the ride on this. But how do we really say, as we move past this debate, the last one in the 2020 presidential election cycle, and we look towards the end of our election season, which is closing in November, right? How is it that we can expect them to look at what happened tonight and how it pertains to the election? Big question.
So no. I think I go back to really what we focus students on, and that's, the evidence, and really pushing students to look at the evidence. There is some time between now and when families will go and vote, and that is what we would encourage students to do. Do your homework, do your research, know what, what your opinions are, what your values are, what you believe, and how does that align with the candidate. And so as parents are talking about these things with students, one of the things one of my staff members mentioned was, what if the students are, have different beliefs than their parents? And so I think that would make for some interesting conversations as well. But again, pushing them to the evidence and taking a look at that, because that is what we do. And we have tons of resources on our site that really does support debate and teaching students and helping teachers learn to coach students through debate. And it involves a ton of, evidence, articles, exercises and activities that people can go and get from our website. That's there. It is, free to whomever would want to use it. And we would encourage people to do that at chicagodebates.org. Yes.
chicagodebates.org. Yeah, it's a wealth of resources. And Ms. Deborah?
Tons.
I think this is a great opportunity to do a group project, to break up a class in groups, virtual or in person, and excavate the question of what does it mean when we talk about, for example, low IQ, how we talk about people with low IQ, or what does it mean when we talk about raising the minimum wage, and have the teams do a deep dive of research into what is the minimum wage and what is a living wage. And let's look and see how much it costs to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in the city that we're living in, and make a budget to see if we can actually afford to live in the city that we're living in. And a lot of times students don't like to work on teams because not everybody pulls their weight, but you can get around that by creating a rubric to sort of like keep track of what everybody's contribution is. And so that it's weighted, so no one has to feel like somebody's getting credit for their work, but they also can engage real life, everyday questions that directly impact their lives.
And Mr. Dennis, what would you suggest?
I mentioned the timelines and the debates with the video clips. I'm sticking with the greatdebates.org. And I would say looking at the curriculum and really thinking about voting rights. As we turn the page into November and we get to the official voting date, even though so many people are voting right now, I think that curriculum that was developed on voting rights is really prescient and sets up a template for deep investigation and conversation.
Wonderful. I think that the one of the reasons why the three of you are here is that, of course, the curriculum that's developed is based in critical thinking and civic engagement and media literacy, and that is all of you represent that work. I'm so grateful for you to come here late at night and to do this after the debate. It's always a pressure-filled moment to go live, but I think the information that you give is so grounding and so important for people to hear. And we are so glad that you all joined us, whether it's live or whether you are listening to us on tape. Please, please, please make sure that you check out greatdebates.org and also greatdebates.org and chicagodebates.org as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and happy voting, everybody.